Everyone, and welcome to Saving the Prairies One Dog at a Time. This is the latest in our series of webinars at Humane Society University, exploring areas of the human-animal bond. I'm excited today to welcome our presenter, Lindsey Sterling Krank, who will be sharing with us the work being done by the Humane Society of the United States Prairie Dog Coalition to save this keystone species of the American Plains states. Like the buffalo that once roamed the plains in the millions, the population of prairie dogs has experienced disastrous declines. But Lindsey will share the initiatives the Prairie Dog Coalition is doing and give pointers on how you can help these amazing creatures survive. Lindsey Sterling Krank is an environmental scientist with a degree from the University of Montana Western. Before arriving in Colorado, she worked as a wildlife technician in Brazil, Nepal, Montana, and in the Grand Canyon. From 2001 to 2003, Lindsey worked for a successful prairie dog relocation and protection nonprofit organization in the field. Lindsey joined the Prairie Dog Coalition in 2004, and over the past almost 10 years has led the organization to help thousands of prairie dogs through education, habitat restoration, and relocation efforts. I'm happy to turn the presentation over to Lindsey Sterling Krank. Lindsey, take it away.
Thank you, Joan. Well, without any further introduction, that was too much. Thank you, Joan. We will get started. All right, so here's a great picture to get us started on this intro slide. That's me right in the front, so now you know what I look like, and I'm talking to one of these super cute prairie dogs that we're going to hear all about today. All right, here's our logo. We've been actually the Prairie Dog Coalition since 2001, and we're very excited and thrilled to join HSUS, which we had been collaborating with since our inception in 2009. So this is our 4th year of being a part of HSUS, and we are really glad that we had the opportunity to become part of this superb organization. Ultimately, what it's helped us be able to do is to allowed us to do, I should say, is to really get our message out about prairie dogs to a larger audience, including folks like you. So thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you can share everything that we discussed today with your friends and colleagues. So I just wanted to start off just to make sure everybody knows how cute the prairie dogs are. In the top right, you will see Utah prairie dogs, and these are 2 pups. This is probably their 1st year. They probably are just coming above ground in the last month or so. There are 5 different species of prairie dogs, and 2 are pictured here. The picture on the left in the sunflowers, and the one of the pups lining up to kiss their dad on the bottom are black-tailed prairie dogs. All right, so the most important thing about prairie dogs is that they are a keystone species, and 9 different wildlife species directly depend on prairie dog populations for survival. Several of them are pictured here. The black-footed ferret in the top left, this is the most connected and associated species to prairie dogs. They are 100% rely on prairie dog populations for their survival. Their diet consists 99% of prairie dogs, and they cannot survive without extensive prairie dog colonies. They are considered the predator of the prairie. We have cute little burrowing owls in the top right. They live in prairie dog burrows. The songbird that you see in the top is a mountain plover. They have to lay their eggs on prairie dog colonies and the little dust patches and dirt patches that prairie dogs create. So you can see just a nice example of how these species are so connected to prairie dog populations. 16 different wildlife species have well-documented positive associations to prairie dogs, and over 200 are associated in some way with prairie dogs. So just like I mentioned on that last slide, prairie dogs are a keystone species. So just like this keystone you can see in this image in an arch, if you were to remove that keystone, that arch would fall apart. Just like if you were to remove a prairie dog from a prairie dog ecosystem, that ecosystem would collapse. Kind of what defines a keystone species is when a species' impact on their community is greater than their abundance. So actually how they are affecting this ecosystem is much larger than we can even actually see. But science has showed us that when we study that, they are indeed a keystone species. That they're not just a food source, and they're not just providing shelter for their burrows, but they also affect vegetation composition. They affect soil composition. Most states warrant them as a species of special concern, and like we mentioned earlier, without their presence, the ecosystem would collapse. So all of these predators wouldn't have something to eat, and all of these other species that live in the Great Plains and in the prairie wouldn't have anywhere to live without the prairie dogs digging these really awesome burrows and tunnel systems for them to live in. So a couple really great, neat things about prairie dogs is that they are very social, they are colonial, and they have an amazing, super fascinating communication system. They live in colonies, and many prey species live in colonies. It's advantageous to them. They can communicate with each other about a predator coming. They can compile their resources. And this picture on the top shows kind of an extensive prairie dog colony. All those little tan, light buff-colored pucks are prairie dog burrows. And historically, these colonies would extend for miles and miles. And now you'd be lucky to get one that extends for a mile. But it's an amazing, loud experience to walk through an extensive prairie dog town on a prairie. They're all chirping and talking all about you. And speaking of chirping and talking all about you, they actually do that. Their communication system was just coined a language, and I suppose, or I think it's when an animal can develop new words or coin a new word, can their communication system be defined as a language. So in fact, that did happen with prairie dogs. And a group of urban prairie dogs that lived in an urban area were translocated out to a rural area, and they were able to record them developing a word for a certain species of hawk, which they did not have in that urban area. And so now that they were able to create new words, that's how they were able to define their communication system as a language. Prairie dogs' words are differentiated through measuring tone, pitch, and frequency. And I'm going to show you an audio clip of that in the next slide. But first, just to get a little bit more specific, I'm going to go through these 6 bullet points on the left. Number 1, a coyote. When a prairie dog sees a coyote, it stands up at its burrow to get a good view of where the predator is heading. So that actually, and then it sounds its alarm. So that actually indicates that it's kind of thinking about the sound that it's making based on what this predator is doing. Prairie dogs can't differentiate between man and woman, but they can differentiate between color. So red and yellow and green, they have words or chirps for all of those different colors. I love this next one. When a prairie dog sees a badger, it's known to bark and duck down. Again, kind of indicating that it's thinking about what it's doing and hoping that the badger won't see it. Red-tailed hawks are one of many birds of prey that like to feast on the prairie dog, and they have different calls for all of the hawks. And the average Fido or dog gets a different prairie dog call from the coyotes lurking around. So here you have these 2 four-legged predators to a prairie dog, but a dog gets a different call from a coyote. And just to kind of elaborate on that bullet point a little bit, prairie dogs actually can communicate and measure danger as well. So if somebody were to walk through a prairie dog colony and do something harmful to a prairie dog, it would get a different call from somebody who continually just walks and passes by this colony. So they are able to pass on to their colony how dangerous these people are and what kind of reaction they want to have based on that information they're sharing with each other. They also can differentiate and have different calls for big, skinny, tall, and short people. All right. So now we get to listen to a bit of Dr. Kon Slobodchkov, who studied all of this research that I just shared with you. It's all his work, and he's a brilliant, amazing man. You should look it up sometime, the Institute for Animal Language, International Institute for Animal Language. And here's a bit of him on NPR.
Different warning cries for different kinds of predators.
For example,
humans, coyotes,
and dogs.
Right.
Is this the kind of thing that we would actually be able to hear the difference between the calls?
I'm guessing that you could hear the difference.
You want to try it, Chad? Yeah. So can you just play those samples?
All right, so here's one. This is another one. All right.
Okay.
Here you go. This is a third.
All right. could hear a slight difference in all of those, and I hope you can too. All right, so, okay, now that we've learned a little bit about prairie dogs, I am supposing you want to know what the issue is here, why have they declined so much, and what are we doing about it? So let's get into the hard part first. A little bit of graphic, detailed, sad information coming up. All right, sadly, all 5 species of prairie dogs have declined by at least 90% throughout their range. They experience these declines from poisoning, government sanctioned in many cases, funded by our taxpayer dollars very often. Shooting, sometimes in contest kills and completely unregulated and not much we can do about it on private lands. Sylvatic plague, a non-native disease which kind of came into the United States from a port in South San Francisco from Asia. Prairie dogs are a native animal to their range and have no immunity to sylvatic plague, and conversion of habitat to cropland, and of course urban sprawl. So because these prairie dogs have declined by so much, all these species that depend on them are also declining now. And what scientists call this is a wave of secondary extinction. So I'm going to tell you now, when we look at this slide, here's their range that you can see over here on the left. That range encompasses all 5 species of prairie dogs. And you'll read this fact that says there's 1 to 2 million acres of prairie dogs remaining. And that might sound like a lot, but there used to be hundreds of millions of acres of prairie dogs. So when you think about all the different species that need the prairie dogs, you think, wow, we really have to have an abundance. So we used to have prairie dogs pretty much contiguous throughout this swath that you can see, and now they're just in very little pockmarks that, intersperse throughout this range. All right, so about 10 years ago, we had 7 large complexes of prairie dogs. And what we really want when we're, working on restoring prairie dogs and protecting prairie dogs is as big as a complex as we can possibly get, because the more contiguous prairie dog colonies we can have in proximity to each other, the more associated species we can have. So when you're doing keystone species management, which again, a prairie dog is a keystone species, you want to have as large of an area possible designated for these species. So about 10, 15 years ago, we had these 7 large complexes. Up in the top, the most northern colony, little diamond, gray diamond you can see up there, that's Phillips County, Montana, one of our big 10,000 acre or larger colonies. Well, it was hit by sylvatic plague in the early 1990s, so it disappears. Thunder Basin National Grasslands, which is the only one in Wyoming, which is just below Montana, it is hit with sylvatic plague in 2001, so it disappears. Now, moving down south to just in the northern border of Mexico, you can see the Janos Reserve, and then coming back up to South Dakota, where our 4 remaining large complexes are, you can see the Pine Ridge Reservation. That is hit by plague. Janos Reserve is hit by overgrazing and drought, so we lose those 2. Now, we have 2 remaining prairie dog colonies that are over 10,000 acres in South Dakota on reservations, the Cheyenne River Reservation and the Rosebud Reservation. Both were poisoned all throughout the colonies. And in fact, the one on Rosebud was illegally poisoned, so we lose those 2. And now, today, we're left with 1, and this is in Kanata Basin. I have to tell you, it has sad news going along with it as well, but a lot of great people and even an extensive great government effort working to preserve it. You can see in the statistics at the bottom of the slide on the left that in 2008, this was a 30,000 acre colony of prairie dogs on the Buffalo Gap National Grassland. It's the most successful black-footed ferret reintroduction in the world. Well, in May of 2008, I actually discovered sylvatic plague on Kanata Basin, and since 2008, it has declined by 21,000 acres, I think, was the latest colony, and it's just below 10,000 acres now. So we're really spending a lot of money and a lot of energy trying to preserve this last kind of stronghold for prairie dogs. There are a couple more hopeful spots on the horizon, which we will get to in a second, but you can see that we really have a lot of work to go for us. And just in the last 20 years, we've lost a major stronghold for prairie dogs throughout the West. All right, so how is all this decline happening? Let's get a little bit more specific. Poisoning. It's brutal. The bottom bullet point that you see, and the one that really gets us a lot of traction and we really want to work on combating so much, is that poisons cause tremendous pain and suffering and actually can take several days for these prairie dogs to die from. I mentioned earlier that a lot of our taxpayer dollars are paying for poisons, and it's true. And one thing all of us can do is to just call our legislators and say, hey, I'm a citizen, I vote, and I don't want my taxpayer dollars spent poisoning prairie dogs or any wildlife for that matter. The way this all got started is on the wagon trains. We came out west, we settled the West, we brought our livestock industry to the West, and we started to kind of get rid of anything that was in our way of this livestock and agriculture industry thriving. And prairie dogs were, even then, using shoddy science, determined that something like 360 prairie dogs eat as much grass as one cattle. And that is not true today, but it was what started and perpetuated the myth that we have to kill prairie dogs in order to have a successful livestock/cattle industry. So that's really what started us down this major extermination campaign that you see here. Just to get a little bit more specific, Steve Forrest, formerly with the World Wildlife Fund, and who's a fabulous advocate and scientist and lawyer, he determined through a study that the total area poisoned for these 9 states listed here through 1916 and 1964, which was when the most poisoning happened, and this is just in 9 states, and prairie dogs have a 12-state range plus Canada and Mexico, was 24.3 million acres. So I feel like I just want to let that settle in for a second. 24.3 million acres of prairie dogs poisoned in these, 40 years. The peak year for poisoning for these states was 1923, when approximately 3.1 million acres, or the size of Connecticut, were poisoned. Steve's study finds that there was state and federal involvement in over 1 million acres of prairie dog control just from 1978 to 1992. So the governments had their hand in significant prairie dog poisoning from the beginning until today. And evidence exists that poisoning programs are suppressing prairie dog numbers to levels that may be too low to support prairie dog community dynamics or associated species. All right, so just to drive home the point, here's a picture of the U.S. Biological Survey spelling out their lovely name in prairie dog carcasses that have been poisoned. Rosal and Kaput, not really having too much time to dive into this too much here, but they are 2 new, just in the last few years, rodenticides that the EPA has registered for use, and it's such a concern that HSUS is really working on, and so many different conservation groups are working on together, because not only do these rodenticides poison and kill prairie dogs, but they also have documented secondary poisoning of antelopes, eagles, hawks, badgers, and actually anything that were to eat a prairie dog that had succumbed to death from poison by Rosal and Kaput could also become poison. So any predator preying on a prairie dog, just like it normally would, but this prairie dog died of Rosal and Kaput, that poison can be passed on. All right, so in addition to poisoning, we're really, obviously all of these wildlife species, but definitely the prairie dogs are confronted with loss of habitat through urban sprawl. Kind of just a chronological, blip at that is obviously we had the Homestead Act in the 1860s, and with each land given to these homes came a large acreage around the homes as well. So we lost habitat there. We lost habitat in the 30s when we really started developing, getting better and better at cropland and agriculture production. In the 1950s, we're really starting to see urban sprawl, and then even today, oil and gas exploitation. So just all of that is added up to really take a nice chunk out of the prairie dog's survival and out of the prairie dog's range and habitat. You can see in these pictures, look at the one in the bottom middle. Here's a prairie dog living next to a gas station. I think that's a 7-Eleven sign in the back, and I see that every day in the Front Range in Colorado. And then there's us, the humans, the livestock industry, the agriculture industry. It really is our largest opponent for prairie dogs. These many ranchers and farmers were raised to fight the prairie dog, and they are still fighting the prairie dog today. we'll get to talking about how that's changing a little bit later on in the discussion. You know, there's kind of 3 myths that go along with these prairie dogs that really perpetuates the whole myths and misperceptions, we'll call. But ultimately, the sad truth is that prairie dogs have little impact on livestock operations when their stock or livestock are managed properly, and it also helps to have a larger property or ranch that you're managing, so then prairie dogs can have some room on that too. Prairie dogs can increase overall soil productivity, and the bottom line is that studies show it costs more to poison prairie dogs than to live with them, and that's something that's important to our work as we move forward. We have a lot of shooting of these cute little animals, and it's heartbreaking for me, I'll just say it. And there's contest kills and shooting for sport and shooting for fun, and sometimes they're shooting for population control too, so that some ranchers are okay with having prairie dogs on their land, but they just don't want to have them everywhere the prairie dogs want to be, so they'll let some stay and reduce their populations via thinning for shooting. And you know, prairie dog shooting is considered unethical by many hunters because you're not eating what you're killing. Few states actually set meaningful limits, and you really can't regulate anything on private land. And just to kind of, for some perspective on the little protections that prairie dogs have, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Utah Game and Fish Department has about 10,000 Utah prairie dogs in their state. And the Utah prairie dogs are listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, but you can see this number here that you're actually allowed to shoot 6,000 of only 10,000 adults in existence. So at any time we could take out 60%. That hasn't happened, which might be why that policy is in place, but it always shocks us that that rule is even on the books. In 2000, 1.2 million prairie dogs were shot in South Dakota alone, and that's just what is reported. So you can see from these statistics that millions of prairie dogs are killed every year. The effects of shooting are detrimental. It has detrimental behavior changes. They lose reproductive capacity. Their body condition becomes diminished. They are stressed out. And then there's lead poisoning from all the exploding bullets and leg fragments left in their ecosystem. I don't really want to expand on contest kills too much, but you can see this cute little family killing prairie dogs for sport and showing off their trophies on the bottom picture here. And I just have one good thing to say that reminds me of. We had a gal working with us as a seasonal doing prairie dog relocations in Wyoming last year. And she used to have pictures of her family doing that. And she spent about one season relocating prairie dogs with us, and I guarantee you she's not going to have pictures of her family doing that now and with her new generation. So it really drove home to me how important education is. All right, another culprit to the decline of the prairie dog population is sylvatic plague. So for most of the last 200 years, we've been so worried about poisoning and habitat loss. This has been the primarily responsible for the sharp decline of the prairie dog populations. But now, more recently, plague has become a key culprit as well, and it's claimed millions of victims of prairie dogs in the western portion of their range. You see this picture of this flea here and this little red spot. That is actually a flea infected with the plague bacterium. And it's one of the greatest threats to prairie dog survival. Prairie dogs do not actually carry plague. It's transmitted via that flea that you just saw through the prairie dogs. So you keep hearing me say sylvatic plague, and you're wondering, is this bubonic plague that we all died from in Europe? And yes, it is. Bubonic plague is treatable through penicillin, through an antibiotic that we have today that we did not have during the Black Death pandemic in Europe. So that's really where it got that name. But today, if you were to somehow contract plague, which it's not easy to do, you can take penicillin, and in 10 days you'll be fine again. one of the biggest, it's one of the hardest things that we're dealing with as conservationists of the prairie dog ecosystem is how do we manage plague. We have, basically 2 routes right now that we're going. It is delta dust, which is a dust that you apply to a prairie dog population to get rid of fleas and prevent fleas, just like you would put on your cats and dogs. And the USGS is making great progress in developing an oral vaccine that would be delivered through oral bait to prairie dogs, just like a grain or something. It would be applied to the grain and put out on their burrows, and that's how prairie dogs can hopefully in the future become vaccinated from sylvatic plague. We talked a little bit about, kind of some laws and policy that are going against prairie dogs earlier, but, the biggest thing is that prairie dogs are actually a rodent, and they are considered and classified in most states and federally as a destructive rodent pest. So without that actual wildlife classification and instead being labeled as a destructive rodent pest, it really gives our government and private landowners the authority to do most anything they want to kill a prairie dog. We do have several states and federal agencies, starting to kind of turn the tide a bit, starting to implement more non-lethal management, starting to, work on creating multi-state plans together to conserve these because the advocates and the environmental groups and the animal welfare groups have made such a good scientific and legal case that they deserve protection that we're starting to, have now be forcing these agencies to do the right thing and, to improve their laws and ethics for prairie dogs, which we are seeing and we're having collaborations and success with. So we'll elaborate that on in a bit. All right, so all these things, terrible things are happening to the prairie dogs, and what are we doing about it? How are we confronting this cruelty and celebrating this species, which is HSUS's mission statement? Well, secretly, I would like to be arming all of them, but I'm just kidding. I'm not, but it is a funny picture and a little bit of an idealistic snapshot. All right, but to be more serious and just to give an overview and then we'll dive in, we're establishing non-lethal model sites in key areas. We are translocating prairie dogs and saving individuals by getting them out of these conflict zones where they're going to meet poison and getting them into recovery zones that are protected instead. We're working on fighting rosal and kaput with so many different other conservation groups throughout the country. We are improving prairie dog management plans in key conservation areas and then going to those areas and building grassroots support and doing education and working with people in these areas to get them to support non-lethal management and support carving out space for prairie dogs in these, public lands that belong to all of us. And then, as we mentioned earlier, education is key to any advocacy effort, and it's really the foundation. And that's where we are starting. Not where we're starting, but we get to about 1,000 students per year, either in their classroom or on a field trip. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're doing for it in the field. You might recognize this map. I need to thank my colleague Jonathan Proctor from Defenders of Wildlife for letting me borrow it. We have identified these key conservation areas as spots where we have an opportunity to restore a large-scale prairie dog complex, where we have willing landowners who want to work with us. And here we go. So you see these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spots. You have 2 in South Dakota, Kanata Basin, the one we mentioned earlier. We're really working there. And the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe, which is a reservation in central South Dakota, where we're working there as well. Kansas, it's some ranchers, great ranchers, progressive conservation-minded ranchers in Logan County, Kansas. We have Colorado, the city of Boulder, an open space. That's our urban example. And down here, we hope to reintroduce prairie dogs to the Guadalupe Mountains National Park in Texas. So I feel like I kind of want to mention here that we gave our Prairie Dog Protector of the Award last year to Mr. Ted Turner. And he has a ranch here in New Mexico, I think it's right about here. It's called Vermejo, and they are just now, after about 10 to 20 years of restoration, have grown a prairie dog population of 10,000 acres or more. So they're just actually under 10,000 acres. I think they're at, or maybe they're just at 10,000 acres. So it's exciting. So I think There's the Turner spot, which is not mentioned, but he's on here. And then also up here, back in South Dakota, the Pine Ridge Reservation, which you saw earlier, had been wiped out from sylvatic plague in the early 2000s, has now started to rebound too. And it is supposedly, tens of thousands of acres, but it's unknown and it's not protected. So we don't really know, what its future holds. But some other groups are starting to work with them on preserving that. So there's actually probably 2 more dots on this that show some potential. So what does prairie dog recovery look like? It's really fun and really hard work. First, in the top left slide, you'll see you got to have a willing landowner. And this willing landowner wants to do some non-lethal management. Oftentimes, this is a government agency, such as the Forest Service in this case, where we have, as HSUS members and constituents and advocates, have submitted a comment saying, hey, we want you to do non-lethal management, and we want this. This is a perfect example of where our comments as advocates work. We put enough pressure on them via our comments and public support so that they now have to do non-lethal management. So we're going to come in and we're going to walk our talk, and we're going to bring some expertise, and we're even going to raise some money and bring some funding, and we're going to bring our sweat equity too, and we're going to get in the field with these agencies and show them how they can do this the right way without killing animals with our taxpayer dollars. So slide number, or picture number 2 here, you see a prairie dog in this little trap, and it was just trapped off of his burrow with some bait. We're going to put him in this kennel, and we're going to take him to this release site. Slide number 3. Here you see the Forest Service, World Wildlife Fund, HSUS, and Defenders all working together to relocate this prairie dog into this acclimation cage. We'll get a little bit more specific on that in the next slide. But then right here, here's Jonathan with Defenders of Wildlife again, putting in a buffer zone. And after we relocate these prairie dogs out of these conflict zones, we want to make this a long-term solution. We don't want to, keep going back and doing this, and we want to implement long-term solutions. That's always the way to go. So we are installing an electric fence here, and this electric fence is about 900 feet wide or 1,000 feet wide, or they can be many different widths. And what it does is the fence keeps the cows out and allows the grass to grow tall, and tall grass is a barrier and migration buffer to prairie dogs. So they don't typically migrate into tall grass areas. If they do, it's much less than if it was just short grass all the way, let's go. So here's another picture of me installing the fence, and then here is a picture of the buffer zone working. Here is a really tall buffer zone where prairie dogs are not interested in going. And now if you'll just review this slide with me for a sec, you've got a willing landowner who wants to do non-lethal management. We're relocating the prairie dogs out of these conflict zones. We're putting them, releasing them back into these recovery zones. We're putting a buffer around the conflict zones so the prairie dogs don't go back into the poison zones. Buffers growing tall, and then ultimately what we really want to see happen is endangered black-footed ferrets get released onto these into these areas. Because if you have endangered black-footed ferrets released onto these areas, then it's the sign that you have 2 things. Number 1, you've got a large prairie dog population, and number 2, it's going to be pretty protected because black-footed ferrets are the most endangered mammal in North America, and prairie dogs are their food source, so we can have a little bit of protections saying, hey, we have to feed these endangered species. So let's backdoor some support, some protection for prairie dogs through ferrets. Sign me up. I'm into it. All right, so non-lethal management, there's so many different things we're doing and improving on all the time. We're trapping and relocating, just like we showed you. We're creating barrier fences, like down here in these bottom 2 examples. We're doing revegetation projects. Even these days, we have determined that you can irrigate a certain spot of a prairie dog colony, and the prairie dogs will stay there. They like that. They're happy there. How can we make these prairie dogs stay in areas where we want them to? We'll make them happy there. So now we're growing grass for them even. We can work with landowners who are adjacent to key conservation areas on public lands and create incentive payments for them to keep the prairie dogs instead of poison the prairie dogs. And actually the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has been really working hard on this for the last 15 years and might actually get some money for this on a large scale through the Farm Bill this year. So that would be great. You can actually now have ranchers wanting prairie dogs. collaborating with private landowners like you can see down here. This is C.C. Steen in South Dakota adjacent to Kanata Basin. And then using these landowners who are making it work as messengers back into their community. So just to get a little bit more specific on what a relocation looks like, this is what we spend the majority of our field season doing. We have in the top left, we're soap foam flushing a prairie dog out of its burrow. It might seem a little intense. It is. They are definitely scared, but it is better than staying and being killed. So we flush. We have a generator and a hose, and we put soap in this big, huge tank and create bubbles, and then use the generator's pressure to force the bubbles down their burrow, which they can completely breathe in, and it's safe. But they're scared, and so they come up, and we catch them with our hands, as you're seeing there, and put them into this kennel, and ultimately take them out to be released. Another way that you can work a take site is through trapping with live bait and humane trapping. And you'll see in the third picture on the top right, this trap says A12. And basically that is coterie or family group A, burrow number 12. And we map each colony, as you'll see in the bottom left here, this big colony. We will map each colony and map out all the family groups. So we'll have family group A next to family group B, north of family group C, to the left of family group D. And we go to the release site, we will put family group A next to family group B, north of family group C, adjacent to family group D, just like we picked it up on the take site. We will put them down just like that on the release site. And we will design and create it and do that so that, Mary and Joe can be next to Mary and Joe when they get into this new release site. You can see us transferring a large number of prairie dogs in the bottom right to the release site. And now you can see the release site. So all of this work is at Thunder Basin National Grassland. And they are taking prairie dogs off of conflict zones that are basically private land boundaries where the private landowners that are adjacent to the national grassland don't want them, and we're putting them into a prairie dog protection recovery area in the core of this grassland. And ultimately our goal is to release ferrets here. So here you can see us creating these burrows. All experienced a sylvatic plague epizootic in 2001, and now we're going back. We've dusted the area. We've prevented plague from coming back in. We're implementing our plague management plan, and now we're taking the prairie dogs off of the conflict zones and putting them back into these recovery areas. So we have abandoned burrows that prairie dogs once occupied that we can work with. So we're going back. We're kind of restoring them. We're taking this piece of black pipe here, which is perforated drain pipe, about 6 inches of it, maybe a little bit more, putting it in the burrow, letting it come up, and then putting the acclimation cap over the burrow. And you can see down in the bottom right, here's a prairie dog getting ready to go into his tube right down here, and he'll just get put right down the tube, and down there is a whole burrow and tunnel system that they already created many years ago. We use the acclimation cages because we want them to stay. We want prairie dogs to, not bolt when they get to this new area that they're like, oh, what's going on? We want them to stay, and we'll give them some incentive to stay in the form of corn, carrots, and peas and oats. And it works. It works. It's great. When we started working here in Thunder Basin, there was about 1,000 to 2,000 acres of prairie dogs, and they are over 9,000 acres and moving into 10,000. So we've been able to successfully restore this prairie dog population to Thunder Basin National Grassland, and we're really proud of it. And we couldn't have done it without our partners at Defenders of Wildlife and World Wildlife Fund and even the Forest Service. And then, like I mentioned earlier, these need to be protected areas where you're doing relocations. No shooting, no poisoning, no threat of it becoming developed. These are protected areas for prairie dogs. All right, so we do some post-release monitoring, just measuring how many individuals are there, how many acres are there, how much did they expand, did they stick, did it work? Like I said, it usually does. We have a really great success rate. And here you can see a prairie dog using his new burrow that was established for him. All right, so It's not just wild-to-wild relocation, which I've been sharing with you, but there are other forms and techniques of non-lethal management. To the left, you can see a form called passive relocation, and that's basically relocating a prairie dog without touching them from one burrow where they can't be or where they're not allowed to be or where they're in danger of poison or bulldozing if they are, and moving them into a burrow that is available to them. And that's through manipulation and basically closing off these burrows and saying, you know what, you really can't be here. And in fact, you're going to have to move over here. Here's a burrow that's open for you. You do this through manipulating their burrow, through working their burrow, and then ultimately closing it down to them once you're sure they've gone. But basically, you're kind of pestering them until they just think, oh, forget this. It is not enough to live in this burrow. I'm going to go over here and live in this other burrow that they're making look so attractive. So that's what's happening there. And then in the buffer zone creation, that's just another. This is just another picture of what I was telling you about earlier. Really, creating these tall grass buffer zones in areas where you don't want prairie dogs to migrate into, and kind of buffering the areas with these tall grass buffer zones. And they don't work in every environment, but they do work in a lot of environments. You have to be able to grow tall grass. These are some urban examples of barriers. Barriers are not 100% successful for deterring prairie dog migration, but they are great at reducing migration. So at a minimum, we are reducing the amount of animals that are going to get killed if they get into these no prairie dog areas. These are, the middle example is a ball field, the right example is a recreation field, and the left example is a neighborhood. So you can see that barriers can look a lot of different ways and work in a lot of different applications. Outreach and education. As I mentioned earlier, it's the foundation of any advocacy movement, and it is true here as well. We get out to the public and educate the public through a main event each year called Prairie Dog Day, which is Groundhog Day for the West, because we don't have groundhogs in the Prairie Dog Range. So we're reclaiming Groundhog Day for Prairie Dog Day here. We work in classrooms. We get to at least 1,000 students every year. That's our goal. These students have take action options. We give lectures in our community and presentations and then really try to collaborate with mainstream partners. So zoos, museums, and libraries. Where else can we share our prairie dog information and scientific data with that you guys can help us get out? Here are some pictures of Prairie Dog Day. Some students, like these in the middle here, have actually taken it all the way to the next level and are getting different cities and municipalities and states to declare it Prairie Dog Day. But the biggest thing about education is that these are our land managers and these are our decision makers of the next generation. So that's where education becomes so important for any effort. So just to kind of tell you a little bit about the actual Prairie Dog Coalition, what are we and what do we do? We are not just a program of the HSUS, but we are a coalition of about 30 different animal welfare and environmental groups. And all of us are engaged either on a large scale or on a small scale in wanting to protect and preserve prairie dog ecosystems throughout their range. Prairie dogs live throughout 12 states in the West and have supporters and followers all over the country. We have a scientific committee, which you can see in the second column in the middle area here. And really one of the biggest things that we do is utilize science to back up our advocacy efforts and to really give us more weight. That's one thing that is just really great for the prairie dog movement is that the science is there to show that prairie dogs deserve protection and need more conservation efforts. So we're really trying to use science as much as possible. And then we have annual meetings. We set our conservation priorities through strategic planning. We try to write down and display and distribute our success models. And we even share, hey, this didn't work with non-lethal management, or this didn't work with our advocacy effort here. So don't waste your time doing that. Instead, use this. And really just sharing information and being a coalition and working together and collaborating and sharing. And then we also identify gaps where prairie dogs aren't protected throughout their range. Okay, nobody's working in this area. For example, in the southern Great Plains, there's so much we can do more in the southern Great Plains. And it's identified as a gap, and now we're going to go fill in that gap and move our efforts down there. Kanata Basin was originally identified as a gap. Nobody was really working there. They had 30,000 acres. They were under extreme pressure from the ranchers and from the local landowners to poison the prairie dogs, and we really came in there and were able to turn that around. Unfortunately, we couldn't turn plague around, but we have a stronger foothold there for sure now. In addition to identifying these main conservation areas and implementing non-lethal management there, we respond to the public. We get calls, hundreds per year of community members and citizens disappointed that a prairie dog colony is imperiled in their neighborhood, and we give them the tools or the information that they could to act and try to save them. We have to raise money for our efforts. We are in charge of raising our own budget every year, and we spend a lot of time doing that. We work on our local management plans so that we can keep our backyards safe and protected, and as an example, as we go out into these key areas throughout the West. We support scientific research, and people call us all the time to say, hey, this bill is coming through our legislature, and I think it's bad for prairie dogs. What can we do? And we help them raise support and community support in those areas if we can. Just wanted to talk a little bit about how some of these efforts have turned into accomplishments. I think I'll skip the first one and come back to it, but Thunder Basin was a result of 15 years of advocacy efforts where we were able to carve out 18,000 acre prairie dog protection and management area in Thunder Basin, and since that happened about 5 or 10 years ago, we've had to work regularly and around the clock and throughout the year to keep those 18,000 acres protected. And so far we've been successful, and we're in regular negotiations with the adjacent landowners and the people that graze their cows on that public lands there to figure out a way to make it work for them, because they have so much power and they are important, and it is how they make their living, regardless of our feelings about that. They're people too. So we are working with them to try to make it work for them, and to try to make having healthy wildlife populations work for them in the lands that they're using for their living. We're training government agency staff on how to do non-lethal management instead of just lethal management. Last year we got to work with Boulder County. The year before that we got to work with the U.S. Forest Service. We've got to work with Arizona Game and Fish, the Department of Defense. Many agencies are coming on and turning to us and saying, okay, we've carved out a space where we can do some non-lethal management. Can you help us? And we're saying yes and training them, and then hopefully we'll just have this group of non-lethal people, non-lethal managers, going out and sharing what they know and training their staff and their crews. So that's really where we're coming from then. And we were able to carve out a 20,000 acre shortgrass prairie preserve with the Colorado State Land Boards and with our fast tracks developers and our light rail developers along the Front Range in Colorado recently. We reduced the amount of lethal prairie dog management every year. We get to over 1,000 students every year. We halt poisonings often through our work and through people submitting comments like you. We're getting the word out about prairie dogs through famous people like Terry Tempest Williams and Ted Turner and Jane Goodall. And last year we relocated 869 prairie dogs out of danger and onto wild protected prairies. And this year we're really taking a proactive approach and launching a project called Homes on the Range. And Homes on the Range identifies and restores the best places to restore large-scale prairie dog ecosystems throughout the West. And then after we identify these through a GIS process, actually, we will go back and use our coalition member groups to launch protection campaigns in these key priority areas. So I'm really excited about that. And how can you get involved? We need so much help, of course. Tell people everything you learned today. Pass the word on. Word of mouth is important. We want to have prairie dog advocates in all 50 states, whether they look like volunteers or donors or state organizers or people that want to buy land for prairie dogs or people that can get their friends to submit comments on federal issues when they come up. We need you. We need you to submit a comment for the prairie dog and speak up for the prairie dogs. Contact me. Or Tina, which is tbozick@humanesociety.org here, to sign up and be on our email and newsletter list. Like we mentioned earlier, call your legislators. Tell them, hey, non-lethal prairie dog management is important to you. You're a taxpayer and you're a voter and you count, and prairie dogs count to you, and you want to see more attention going to non-lethal management and less attention going to lethal management. I mean, quality of life for us stems from our environment. We see animals dying and suffering around us, and that affects us. That affects our physical well-being, and it affects our communities, and we can make it better, and we have the tools to. And just telling your legislators and the people that you voted into office that that's important to you is the way we get that done. That's grassroots support. It totally works. It's a little bit of a pain in the rear, but it really works, and we all have to do it. And we are responsible to our future generations to do this. Become an educational presenter and lead presentations in classrooms around you. We have a fabulous lead educator who will tell you and send you a prairie basket and send you off on your own. You can become a donor. You can, if you can't become a donor, maybe you can donate $10, and you can get 10 people in your neighborhood to donate $10. That's $100. That's fabulous. That means a lot to us. These are, some of the main ways that you can help become prairie dog advocates in our area, and what you can do to help stem the prairie dog decline throughout the West. All right. That about wraps it up for today. I'm a little talked out, but I would love to hear any questions, and let me know what you got.
Oh, thank you, Lindsey. This has been an amazing, amazing presentation. I've learned so much today. Most of the questions that we had, you've answered in your presentation. One question I'd like you to expand a little bit on the sylvatic plague and whether there is research being done to eliminate that plague. I know you talked about some of the protocols for the recovery areas that you're working on. I know that's a big concern to make sure that those fleas and that disease is no longer a threat to the animals that are being relocated there. But if you could talk a little bit about what's being done and is any progress on the horizon?
Yeah, thank you for that question. One thing that's so difficult about plague for land managers and scientists to work with is there's so much more we don't know and understand about sylvatic plague than what we do know. And as I mentioned earlier, sylvatic plague started in Asia, and it's in Europe, and it's in North America now, and so there's research going on about sylvatic plague all over the world, and there's actually plague conferences just on sylvatic plague and what's going on and what's the research going on. And the research that relates to prairie dogs right now and what's being done specifically related to prairie dogs is through the USGS, and it's an oral plague vaccine. And they have developed a vaccine which in the lab has been showed to reduce the amount of susceptibility that prairie dogs get from the plague bacterium. And that is now this year, this fall, maybe it's even this summer, going into field trials. So there have been, I think, 10 to 20 different sites that have signed up and been selected to become a field trial site, and it's called SPV, Sylvatic Plague Vaccine Field Sites. And all the field trials are going to go on this summer, and then they're going to collect all the data, publish the results of that, analyze that, publish the results of that, and then see, what kind of more wide-scale distribution can we have for this vaccine? Did it work? And, can we actually vaccinate prairie dogs against plague? And if it does work, which I think people are quite hopeful, they will probably start in the areas where black-footed ferrets have been reintroduced, and then probably land managers will want to give this vaccine to prairie dogs in areas where they want to conserve them and keep them and have figured out how to manage them in a way that, doesn't create conflict or reduces conflict with their adjacent landowners. And then, sadly, they probably won't give them to the ones, populations that they don't want. So that, that's where we are. But its plague started in the east, and it's just slowly moved. There was a picture of a line in a map on one of the slides, and you could see how it was kind of going through the middle of the United States. And it is anticipated that plague will move all the way to the East Coast ultimately. So as it slowly gets there, we will probably develop more and more science along the way.
Thanks. One last question on how are prairie dogs looked at by Native American communities, and Are there efforts to reach out to those communities and make sure they're participating in species recovery or protection efforts on their land?
Yeah, you might have heard me mention some of the different, big prairie dog populations and a recovery area on reservations. We are working a lot with the Lower Brule Sioux tribe, which is a Lakota tribe in central southern South Dakota along the Missouri River there. And there's a fabulous wildlife biologist there, Sean Grassel, who has really done a great job getting his community of tribal members to want to restore and conserve the prairie dogs. And one thing that the conservation groups always say is how much more the tribes do with so much less funding than some of our government agencies, sadly. And the government agencies, like I said, some of them are, starting to make some great decisions and make some great accomplishments. So I'm not bashing them at all, but the tribes should really be given accolades for how much they do. Just like any community has diversity, there are regular cattle ranchers on tribes that don't like prairie dogs either, and they see them as competition. And I will say that just period, ranching is very difficult. In the West, we don't have much water, and it's hard to make a living. And so I think they see these prairie dogs as one more thing in their way. So that attitude is also in the tribes. And on the other hand, there's tribal Native American lore that says that prairie dogs are the indicator for rain. And there's this beautiful story of this agency wanting to kill all these prairie dogs, and I think it was the Navajo Nation saying, if we kill all the prairie dogs, who will pray for the rain? And they were able to keep this large prairie dog population because it was important to them that they had rain and that they had the prairie dogs, and that it was just part of their culture and history. So it's diverse in the tribes, and yes, we are working with them, and it's a focus of ours.
Thank you, and I think that answer also brings us right back to the beginning, where we're talking about what a keystone species this is and how important saving each part of an ecosystem is to actually maintaining our world and its habitability.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time. I want to thank you so much, Lindsey Sterling Krank, for joining us today, and thank you everyone who is listening in to the seminar, to the webinar today. I hope you'll share it with everyone that you think might benefit from it, and widen the circle here so that people are aware of the issues and can become involved in the issues. We'll be having more webinars coming up. Please go to www.humanesocietyuniversity.org to see everything that's going to be coming up. We appreciate your being with us today. Thank you, Lindsey, and have a good day, everyone.
Have a